Hey team, welcome to another video for Building Better Baseball. And this is the Bullpen Bulletin. I'm Coach Hart, and today we are talking about hitting zones and how using hitting zones will sharpen your plate discipline and make you a more disciplined hitter when you're up at the plate. So if you're looking to become a more disciplined hitter without actually swinging the bat, then this is the perfect video for you. And I can't wait to dive into this content with you. Remember, I'm Coach Hart. Welcome to the Bullpen Bulletin and Building Better Baseball, the best place for baseball education. Let's dive into hitting zones. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the regular strike zone locations. And this diagram here, this is for a right-handed hitter, and you can just switch it to left-handed. You can just reverse it or mirror it for a left-handed hitter. These are the basic 9 locations of the strike zone, and there are not 4. There are really 9 locations that as a hitter, you need to be aware of. And a lot of young players especially, they only see 4 locations of the strike zone. They see the high pitch, they see the low pitch, they see the inside pitch, and they see the outside pitch. They don't break it up into 9 locations. They really only see 4. And that's something we're going to change in this video today. And you will improve your hitting instantly as soon as you recognize these 9 locations. So as soon as you take your strike zone locations from 4 to 9 and you expand your vision of the strike zone and your knowledge of the strike zone just by these locations, you instantly become a better hitter. So there are 2 types of hitters. And every hitter has their own hitting zones, right? And a hitting zone, when I talk about a hitting zone, is basically you're dividing the strike zone into 3 categories of locations or 3 temperatures. We're going to talk about the different temperatures of the strike zone today. And that's basically what we're doing when we're talking about hitting zones is we're dividing up the strike zone from what you like to what you don't like. And there are really 2 types of hitters. There's a hitter who knows their hitting zones. So every time they step up to the plate, they're thinking about their hitting zones. And a hitter who swings at any pitch that looks good without thinking about their hitting zone. So they just basically go up there blindly and they see a pitch and they swing at it to see if it looks good, right? And that's not how we want to hit. That's not a great hitter. That's not what great hitters do. So we're going to get into hitting zones now. So your hitting zones. As an example of how to break down your hitting zones, these are actually my hitting zones. This is my hitting zone from when I was in high school and college. So this is just a good example for you on how to break down the strike zone and the 9 locations for your hitting zones. There are 3 temperature levels to break down your zones. There are hot zones, right? So the red ones are the hot zones. These were my hot zones when I was in high school and college. There are warm zones, and the warm zones are the yellow color, right? And these were my warm zones when I was in high school and college. And there are cold zones. There are 2 cold zones at the bottom for me personally, but the cold zones are the blue zones, right? So those are the 3 temperature levels that we're talking about when we're talking about breaking your strike zone into hitting zones. And think about it. What are your zones? Have you ever broken up the strike zone and thought about what pitches that you really like and what pitches you kind of don't like and what pitches you really don't like and you never swing at? You should think about it sometime and break it up into the hot, warm, and cold zones. So what are your zones? Now the hot zones. When you break down your zones into the temperatures, you should start with your hot zone. Always your hot zone. So your hot zones are the locations that you love to hit. And every single time you see a pitch in your hot zone, your eyes light up and you get ready to swing and crush the ball. So your hot zones are the locations that you consistently swing at. So every single time that the ball is in whatever location, you swing at it consistently, that's a hot zone. Make solid contact. So every time you do swing at a pitch in a certain location and you make solid contact, then that's a hot zone. And you get the most hits. So whatever location you hit the most and you get the most hits off of, that is most likely a hot zone. So whenever you're thinking about your hot zones and you're trying to decide which zone is your hot zone, these are the things that you should be thinking about when you're identifying your hot zones. Your warm zones are the yellow zones, right? So your next zone to decide is your warm zone. These zones are the locations that you are able to hit, but you don't always swing. Think about the locations. So this is how we break it down. This is how I broke it down when I was in high school and college. This is how you break it down. That you swing at 50 or 60% of the time. So about half the time. Have weaker contact or more outs, right? So every time you swing, you do make contact, but it might be like a rollover ground ball. or it might be a weak fly ball to the outfield. So you have weaker contact, but you do make contact, and you have more outs. And that you check swing on a lot. And this is a big one. So you see the pitch and you think it's good, so you start to swing, but then you see that it's in that warm zone or that zone that it's like 50-50, I might swing, I might not, and then you do a little check swing. So any location that you check swing a lot, then that would be a warm zone for you. Now we're getting into the cold zones, right? So the only zone left is your cold zone. These are the leftover locations that you haven't identified as warm or hot. And these are the locations, so think about it. These are the locations that you never swing at. When you do swing, though, you consistently swing and miss. So every time you do swing, which is me in high school on the low outside pitch, whenever I swung, I would always swing and miss. I would rarely hit the ball, and if I did, it would be a weak ground ball to the pitcher. I hated that zone. And these are most of your strikeouts. So if there's a location that you always swing at and you always get a strikeout or you always swing and miss, that is a good indication that that is a cold zone for you. And this is a good way to think about identifying what your cold zones are. Now that we know how to break up our strike zone into hot, warm, and cold, I'm going to teach you how to use your zones. So this is what your mind should see. If you look at the picture, this is what you should see every single time you step into the box. And there are two big reasons to identify your hitting zones. The first one that we're going to talk about is it will help you find your hitting weaknesses so you can improve your hitting of those locations. And overall, it'll just make you a more disciplined hitter, like we said in the beginning of the video. So we're going to go over and break down these two reasons of how to use your zones. Now, the first one, it'll help you find your hitting weaknesses. So if you know your cold zones, if you think about it, if you know your cold zones, you know that you need to practice hitting those locations the most. When I was in high school, even though those were my cold zones, I was always practicing the low outside and the low inside hitting pitch, right? I was always trying to practice those so I could improve those because those were my cold zones, right? If I improve those, I just become an overall better hitter. Improving on your cold zones will make you a more complete hitter, like I said, and that's the key word, complete. It'll make you a more complete hitter. You could be a great hitter when you hit the ball, but that doesn't mean that you're a complete hitter. Complete hitters know how to cover the whole strike zone, whether they're hot, cold, or warm, and improving on your cold zones will just overall make you a more complete hitter. And the goal is to only have red, which is hot, and yellow, warm, and eliminate blue. And the second one is it'll make you a more disciplined hitter, right? So the pitches you swing at should be a combination of your hitting zones and the count that you're in. So the balls and strikes, whatever count you're in, combined with your hitting zones. If you're in a hitter's count, you should only be looking for your hot zones. So this is a big key in disciplined hitting, is only looking for your hot zones when you have the count in your favor or you have a hitter's count, right? So if you have, 3 balls and 1 strike, that's a perfect hitter's count. You should only be looking at your red locations. If you see a ball in your warm or your cold zones, you're not swinging because you have a hitter's count, right? So all hitters' counts, you should only be focusing on your hot zones. And if the ball is there in your hot zone, you crush that ball. If you're in a non-hitter's count, then you should expand your strike zone to the warm and the cold zone. So if you have like a 1-2 count, like a non-hitter's count where the count is not in your favor, that's when you expand your strike zone and your vision to the warm and the cold zones, right? So that's when you bring in the warm and the cold, is when you have a non-hitter's count. So not knowing your zones and how to relate them to the count results in undisciplined swinging. And that's what I see a lot of young players do, is just undisciplined swinging. If you go up and your first pitch is in your warm zone, if it's like a high pitch up here and you swing, that's undisciplined swinging because that ball is in your warm zone and the only balls as a 0-0 count that you should be swinging at are your hot zones, right? So that's what I mean when I talk about undisciplined hitting. So some final thoughts here for you. Every hitter has pitch locations that they like more than others, right? You don't have to be able to hit all 9 locations to be a great hitter. I can tell you that there is no hitter in the world where every single location, all 9 of these balls are red. No way, not possible. There are probably a lot of players that only have red and yellow, and probably mostly red, but there is nobody that can hit every single location the same and have it be a hot zone. So you don't have to hit all 9 locations to be a great hitter. And like I say here, great hitters don't hit the whole strike zone. They hit their hot zones consistently. They know their hot zone, and when they see a pitch in their hot zone, they swing and they hit that ball consistently. Their warm zones only when they need to. So when they're in a non-hitter's count, they expand their vision and they expand their strike zone to their warm zones, right? So they only hit their warm zones when they need to, and they lay off their cold zones. They know what their cold zones are, and they lay off those pitches unless they have like an 0-2 count and they know that the umpire is calling a really far outside strike and their outside pitch is their cold zone. They might swing at it, but they really do lay off their cold zones, and that's what disciplined hitting is, and that's what makes a great hitter. And lastly is you should use batting practice as a tool to find your zones, right? So use batting practice as a tool to find your zones. Now, I hope that you enjoyed this hitting zone video. It's kind of like a different idea to think about hitting and how to improve your hitting without actually taking reps and without actually swinging the bat. Hopefully, this just makes you aware of how you can use the strike zone as a hitter to your advantage by using your hitting zone. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Don't forget to grab your free guide linked below. I have a ton of them down there, down in the description. There's a free practice plan along with a whole bunch of other ones. Take whichever one that you would like. I made them for you for free to help you out in your baseball journey. So again, I'm Coach Hart. This is Building Better Baseball. I really hope you enjoyed this bullpen bulletin with the hitting zones, and I will see you in another video real soon.